What you are about to see is a remote viewing session that was done totally blind by the remote viewer. The remote viewer knew nothing about the target or the nature of the project. The remote viewer is going to describe all of the perceptions that the remote viewer obtained for this target. And then after the remote viewer describes the entire session, I will then tell the remote viewer what the target actually is in the target reveal for this. So I'm going to tell you, however, what the target is so that you can follow along when the remote viewer is describing the target. Okay, but remember, the remote viewer does not know what you know when describing the target. Okay, so the target for this deep news session is, it has two focuses. First focus is the Democratic National Convention in Chicago on the 19th to the 22nd of August in 2024. So that's the target time, to the 19th to the 22nd of August 2024. And the location is, location A is outside the United Center. That's a building during the Democratic National Convention in Chicago from the 19th to the 22nd of August. And time point Z is the most disruptive moment at location A. So the most disruptive moment outside of the United Center during the Democratic National Convention. And we'll have text up when you're watching the remote viewer describe the session so that you can be remembered what these things are. Now, focus 2 is the same thing for the Republicans. Focus 2 is the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee on the 15th to the 18th of July in 2024. And the focus is the most visible disruptive event to occur outside of the FISERV, F-I-S-E-R-V. FISERV, I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation, but the FISERV Forum during the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee from the 15th to the 18th of 2024. Now, time point W is the most disruptive moment at location J. And location J is outside of the FISERV Center during the convention in Milwaukee. And then what we're really looking for is what kind of activity is going on, mostly outside of the convention hall in both Chicago and Milwaukee during the Democratic and Republican conventions this summer. All right, so now let's see what the remote viewer actually perceived, and then we will tell the remote viewer what the actual target is after that. And you can see there the remote viewer's response and so on. Okay, let's see what the remote viewer perceives.
Hi everybody, welcome to Deep News. And now we have Intysam, and just to be sure, Intysam, you do not know the nature of this target?
No idea.
Great, so why don't you tell us what you got?
Okay, so my first perception of the target is of a base surface level topography. It seems quite man-made, feels like a city or an urban environment with some foliage. There's also a land-water interface nearby, so yeah, quite a somewhat extensive water. There was structures on land, although some felt like they were next to the water. So for this, I deducted the House of Commons just because of the, structure next to water part. Multiple subjects, male and female, multiple non-surface structures in the area. And I felt energetics, but I don't think it was like the physical, typical energetics. And this is a somewhat loud environment. I could hear like an urban scape, sounds, and temperatures feel cool.
Very good, very good. I see you got a nice sketch as well. So what else is going on as you start moving to the center of the target?
So, at the center of the target, I'm getting many subjects. It feels like a focused gathering. I deducted a protest. Felt like subjects were wearing dark-colored clothing. Their arms were moving quite a bit. It looks like these subjects are in an environment that has multiple levels. Like it felt like some subjects were on stairs or higher than other subjects. Looks like the subjects are interacting with each other. Their motion and activity feel like it has some force behind it. Some subjects also look injured, so I could see blood like on the nose region right there.
Interesting. So what did you get also in this sketch? You want to describe a little bit of what's going on there?
So I have basically what I'm saying is like there's a structure, there's a few steps, subjects all around. There are subjects with dark attire, and they have like headgear. They deducted like a hard hat because it kind of looks like that shape. So here I was sensing bitterness, feelings of things being unfair, some anger. And then the deduction would be like these are like justice warriors.
Justice warriors. Interesting. So what else happened? I know you moved to time point Z at location A and started to describe. What else did you get there?
So at this point, I'm picking up subjects inside a structure. The structure looks large and somewhat open inside. It feels like subjects are few compared to the size of the structure, which kind of has like a hall type feeling. Brown hues inside this room. And it feels that like the subjects here seem to be speaking or deliberating. When I'm looking at the subjects, I'm picking up these like formal wear, dark hues on them. The space itself looks well furnished. And then I have a tiny sketch here of like subjects sitting in like rows. And then there's one subject that's like standing behind a pedestal. That's high level. But
like a podium or something like
podium,
that? Oh,
yes.
I see. Interesting. Okay, so you moved outside later on in page 9. What happened there?
So outside, it feels like there's lots of energetics coming from subjects outside. A lot of movement, a lot of activity. There's also physical energetics as well, like fire and heat. The space outside looks quite open. And then there's this large structure and a green lawn or like a field. Yeah.
And what about activity H?
Activity H. That's violence of some kind. Feels like two opposing forces. Each side is showing strong emotions. Feels like what they're doing is right. There's objects being used. And there's a whirlwind of activity and emotions. Also, there's some grief coming from some subjects here.
Interesting. And I see you have a detailed sketch of that sort of action happening, it seems.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, you even have a picture of a person holding up a sign while other people seem to be having the violence happen to them.
Yeah, somebody's getting battered.
Yeah.
Or a few people. Yeah, you can tell there's two separate groups here.
I see. Interesting. Okay, so then we moved on to focus 2, and we have moving to the center of the target for focus 2. So what did you start picking up there?
So this focus 2 environment looks like an urban area, but without the vibrancy of an urban area. Some subjects are walking in the streets, and there's some vehicles. I deducted the military because of the subjects walking with vehicles part. Something heavy about this target activity. Subjects here are in uniform. The vehicles are bulky and have an identical feel to the build and color. These vehicles. There are other subjects on the sidewalk, and they seem quiet and like they're mostly observing.
Interesting. So you started to move to location J, and what did you get there when you started describing that place?
Okay, so location J, the landscape looks somewhat monochromatic, like beige hues mostly. The structures also look kind of dull or industrial, but that's, industrial is a deduction for me. There are subjects inside and outside of the structures. There's also a water source nearby, and there's a irregular shaped dominant structure. I deducted the pentagon because it's irregular and angular is what I was getting.
Okay, interesting. So yeah, we got a location J, now looking at time point W. What did you get there?
So location J has a buzz of activity, lots of activity and movement happening here. There are a couple of non-surface structures above this dominant structure here. heavy vehicles moving towards and away from the structure. There's a pattern or symbol that I keep seeing again and again, and it's I deducted like it's a flag or a uniform, but what this pattern, this symbol that I keep seeing is like an oval, and then there's like two birds coming from the side of it, some little emblem on the center. I'm seeing the colors blue, yellow, and gold, but basically it's like a circle with two birds on each side. So there's a few different focused gatherings happening inside the dominant structure. Subjects look uniform. The colors looks like it's brown and beige. There's various installations or structures that weren't there before, but now there are, now they are. Several groups of focused gatherings outside the structure as well. The subjects look more diverse. The subjects outside look more diverse than the subjects inside the structure. There's just more diversity in terms of what they look like.
I see you continued on for quite a bit about these probes. What else did you get?
So the subjects are really close together, and the lighting seems dark. Almost feels claustrophobic. This is for activity R.
Activity R.
Yes, so activity R, subjects look really close together, lighting seems dark. It feels like a claustrophobic environment. Subjects feel like they're moving or scooching forward, but their movements, they feel quite restrained. There's more subjects coming into this environment, and there are spaces that seem narrow and others that are wide open. So there's many subjects here. The first impressions are of subjects storming into an environment. I feel an uncovering of things. It seems like subjects pull objects up and out, but I don't know if that was like, I'm seeing that because it's more symbolic than actually like it's actually happening. So subjects pulling objects up and out. There's a hectic, like it just feels so hectic, and there are subjects here who feel confident, and a separate group of subjects being pushed into the wall, and these subjects, they feel fear. Certain subjects have a mob mentality, like they're just charging into the structure, and it feels like these subjects are taking control of the structure, and to them it feels like a very symbolic moment. So I deducted a few things. I deducted the V for Vendetta scene where the subjects are like, yeah, we're empowered. But I also deducted January 6th.
I see. Interesting. Yeah. Okay, so why don't you describe a little bit about this picture that you have written down there? Basically is what you just said, but any words?
Well, it's this structure, and you have a group of subjects that are kind of backed into a corner. They're they feel more like restrained, and then you have all these other subjects approaching from different sides.
Interesting. Well, very very hectic environment indeed. You ready to know the identity of the target?
Yeah, I feel like I'm just speaking gibberish right now. I have no context to it.
It's really an interesting target. So here, the title for this session was The Democratic and Republican National Conventions in Chicago, from the 19th to the 22nd of August 2024, as well as the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee from the 15th to the 18th of July 2024. So basically we wanted to look into both of those conventions and just see what was going to happen. And it seems like hold on, let me hand this over to you first.
So Focus 1 is the Democratic Convention?
That's correct. Focus 1 is in Chicago, and the other one's in Milwaukee. So the one in Chicago is called the United Center, and that is basically it's the stadium of the city, basically. And then the other one for the Republicans in Milwaukee, that is called the Fiserv Forum, and that is also a stadium-like structure within Milwaukee. And basically you described both of these urban areas as pretty much what they are. Chicago, you picked up on the water. It's there. Chicago's on the water. Milwaukee also is a city on the water. And you described also, it's interesting, you described Milwaukee as having a bit less of the the vibrance, the glitz that Chicago, I guess, had in terms of the relative urban environments that you were describing there. So it was that was very interesting choice of words. And you also picked up on scenery that seemed very much political in nature. You had subjects standing at podiums, on pedestals, on stairs, in front of other groups of subjects, and most importantly, we had activity H and activity R, which was the most disruptive activity in those respective focuses. So activity H was in focus 1 with the Democratic National Convention. That was specifically the most disruptive activity that took place. And time point Z in that same focus was the most disruptive moment at location A being outside of the United Center during the Democratic National Convention in August of 2024. And for focus 2, same thing, switching it over to Milwaukee for the Fiserv Forum. And basically we had time point W, which is the most disruptive moment at location J being outside of the Fiserv Forum, and activity R being the most disruptive activity, which seems like maybe some people got into the Fiserv Forum and were unwelcome guests, to say the least, sort of just acting amok. You have also in the Democratic National Convention, you have quite a hefty amount of situations where maybe riot police were called as just sort of a high-level assumption based on your data, and some people were getting beaten in the street for their protests at the Democratic National Convention. So seems like it's not very surprising, seeing the way that the world is right now, that there would be violence at these two major political events.
Yeah.
So that is what the data shows us, though, that there will be some hectic, volatile activity at these events. So yeah, pretty interesting.
So this what I thought was a pentagon is actually a stadium.
Yeah, it's a stadium actually, but it's sort of a boxy shaped structure, but it's also has this big curve you can probably look it up.
I only see the inside of it though, or from images. I'll do that later. The point is, that's what that was.
They do have like basketball games and stuff at the Fiserv Forum, so it is a stadium. It's 100% like on the inside. It's a stadium seating, auditorium-esque type of place. You said auditorium-esque type of environments as well, and so that is exactly, you are correct. It is a oddly shaped structure for stadium seating, and that is what these places were in both focuses.
Milwaukee, okay.
Yeah.
Well, if anybody from Milwaukee, I'm sorry for calling your city dull. I didn't know.
Also, you have to remember, it's these are also in reference to the previous urban environment, because you looked at Milwaukee right after you were looking at Chicago, and those descriptive terms could also have erupted just out of the contrast in the architecture that you were noticing from a Chicago skyline to a Milwaukee skyline.
I just looked at pictures. It doesn't look dull at all. So I think it's just the colors that I was like, interpret this. Things don't look very vibrant when you look at it through your mind's eye. Okay, well, this is interesting.
It was very interesting, and all data that came from a completely blind perspective. You started off with 8 numbers and you came up with all this stuff. So it's great stuff.
Wow. We'll have to wait and see the outcome.
Yeah, we'll wait and find out and see how all these sessions sort of hashed out. So any last concluding questions or comments?
No, not at this time.
Sounds great. Okay, well, thank you so much, Intysam, and thank you everybody else for watching.